Couldn't afford, I didn't live my life. I managed it. That's the sentence that came to me one night without warning, and once it arrived, it refused to leave. It didn't come during a crisis or a breakdown. It came while I was sitting at the kitchen table, lights dimmed, listening to the quiet hum of a house that had already given me everything it ever would. I had just finished solving someone else's problem. Again. For as long as I can remember, people have come to me when things fell apart. When decisions felt heavy. When life stopped making sense. I was the calm one. The rational one. The one who could untangle messes without adding new ones. I took pride in that. It felt like purpose. I listened. I advised. I mediated. I fixed. And each time I did, I felt useful, which I confused with being alive. No one ever asked me to sacrifice my own life for theirs. I did that voluntarily, quietly, without even noticing. I told myself I was being generous, mature, supportive. I told myself my turn would come later. Later became a habit. I learned early how to step aside emotionally. How to make space for other people's needs without questioning whether I was erasing my own. I learned how to anticipate problems before they happened, how to smooth conflicts before they escalated, how to keep everything running. I became indispensable. And invisible. At first, I didn't mind. There's comfort in being needed. It gives you a role. A shape. A reason to wake up and keep going even when you don't know what you want for yourself. I told myself I was selfless. What I didn't realize was that I was also hiding. Every time I helped someone else make a decision, I avoided making one of my own. Every time I focused on another person's crisis, I postponed asking uncomfortable questions about my own life. Questions like, what am I building? Questions like, what do I actually want? Those questions felt indulgent. Even selfish. I convinced myself that wanting was a luxury I couldn't afford while everyone else needed me to be stable. So I stayed stable. Years passed like that. People moved forward. Changed jobs. Started over. Made mistakes. Fell apart and rebuilt themselves. They came back to me each time, and I helped them again, feeling quietly proud that I could remain unchanged while they evolved. I thought that meant I was strong. What it really meant was that I was static. There were moments, brief, uncomfortable moments, when I sensed something was wrong. Late nights when exhaustion felt deeper than it should. Mornings when I struggled to remember what I was looking forward to. Conversations where I nodded at the right moments but felt disconnected from my own voice. I ignored those moments. I had responsibilities. People relied on me. I told myself that was enough. Then one evening, someone thanked me. They said, I don't know what I'd do without you. You always know what to do. It was meant as praise. It landed like a weight, because in that instant, I realized something terrifyingly simple: I had no idea what to do with my own life. I knew how to analyze options. How to weigh consequences. How to predict outcomes for other people. But when I turned that same attention inward, there was nothing there. No clear desire. No direction. Just an open space I had avoided filling for years. I went home and sat alone, replaying that thought until it hurt. How had I become so competent in everyone else's life and so absent from my own? The answer unfolded slowly. I had built my identity around being the solution. The fixer. The steady presence. And identities like that come with a hidden rule: you don't get to need things yourself. Needing would disrupt the role. So I didn't need. I adjusted. I accommodated. I delayed. I told myself I was being patient. But patience without intention is just another form of avoidance. Looking back, I can see how carefully I avoided choice. Whenever a decision felt personal, risky, emotionally loaded, I redirected my energy outward. There was always someone else's situation to focus on. Someone else's dilemma to solve. I stayed busy fixing the cracks in other people's lives while my own quietly dried out. The scariest part is that nothing ever collapsed. There was no dramatic consequence to warn me. No moment where everything broke so badly that I had to confront myself. My life was functional. And that was the problem. Functional lives can hide an incredible amount of emptiness. One night, sitting there in the quiet, I asked myself a question I had never allowed before: if no one needed me tomorrow, who would I be? The answer didn't come. That silence frightened me more than any conflict ever had. Because it meant that somewhere along the way, I had stopped living as a person and started living as a role. A role that made sense. A role that was appreciated. A role that had slowly replaced my own desires. I wasn't angry at anyone else. That would have been easier. I was angry at myself. For choosing usefulness over presence. For confusing responsibility with purpose. For building a life so focused on preventing problems that I never asked what it was actually for. I understood then that I hadn't sacrificed my life for others. I had postponed it indefinitely. And once I saw that truth clearly, I knew I couldn't go back to not seeing it. After that night, something inside me loosened, not enough to break, but enough to make everything feel unstable. I still answered calls. Still listened. Still helped. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, a quiet resistance had begun to grow. Every time someone leaned on me, I felt the weight differently. Not heavier, clearer. I started noticing how automatic my role had become. People didn't ask if I had space. They assumed it. They didn't check whether I was tired. They trusted that I would handle it. And why wouldn't they? I had trained them to believe that I was always available, always capable, always steady. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at how easy it had been for me to disappear into usefulness. The exhaustion deepened. Not the kind sleep fixes, the kind that comes from being emotionally overdrawn for years. I would sit across from someone pouring out their fears and feel an unfamiliar distance growing inside me, like a muscle finally refusing to contract. I began to dread the phrase, "Can I talk to you?" Not because I didn't care. Because I cared too much for too long. One afternoon, in the middle of someone else's crisis, I felt something snap quietly into place. They were explaining their dilemma, looking at me with expectation, waiting for clarity. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer ready. I could have improvised. I was good at that. Instead, I said, "I don't know." The room went still. It was such a small sentence, but it felt like I had committed a betrayal. I watched confusion flicker across their face, not anger, not disappointment, just surprise. As if the floor had shifted slightly beneath their feet. I apologized immediately. That reflex disgusted me. Why was I apologizing for honesty? That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. It followed me home, echoed in my thoughts, pressed against the realization that I had never allowed myself to be incomplete in front of anyone. I had built trust by being whole for others while slowly hollowing myself out. I started experimenting with restraint. Not fixing immediately. Not offering solutions unless asked. Not rushing to carry weight that wasn't mine. These weren't dramatic boundaries. They were barely visible. But they changed everything. Some people adapted. Some grew distant. Some pushed harder. I learned quickly who relied on me and who depended on me. There's a difference I had never noticed before. Reliance respects limits. Dependence ignores them. The guilt came fast and sharp. Every time I didn't step in, I felt like I was abandoning someone. Like I was failing at the only thing that had ever defined me. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being selfish, cold, unkind? I had no internal compass for this territory. When you spend your life prioritizing others, choosing yourself feels like trespassing. The real crisis came when someone close to me said, half joking, half serious, "You've changed. You're not as helpful as you used to be." They didn't mean to hurt me. They succeeded anyway. That sentence exposed everything. My worth, in their eyes, had been measured by my availability. My value had been tied to my usefulness. And I had accepted that arrangement without ever questioning it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I realized something deeply uncomfortable: if I continued like this, my life would never truly be mine. It would always be an extension of other people's needs, emergencies, and indecisions. And yet, letting go felt cruel. Who was I to stop helping, when helping was what I was good at, when it was what people expected, when it was what made me feel necessary? The answer arrived slowly, painfully. I wasn't afraid of hurting others. I was afraid of being unnecessary. That fear had shaped my entire adult life. I saw now how often I had inserted myself into problems that weren't mine, how often I had used other people's chaos to avoid facing my own emptiness. Fixing others gave me identity without risk. But identity built on function collapses the moment the function stops. I stood at the edge of a terrifying choice. If I continued as I was, I would remain needed and empty. If I stepped back, I might finally hear my own voice and lose my place in other people's lives. There was no version of this where I kept everything. Something had to be released. And for the first time, the question wasn't how to help someone else. It was whether I was willing to let myself matter, even if that meant disappointing the people who had come to depend on my silence. Letting go didn't happen in one brave moment. It happened in many small, uncomfortable ones. I didn't announce that I was changing. I didn't explain myself in long speeches. I simply stopped being available in the ways that erased me. I paused before answering. I asked for time. I said, "I can't help with this right now," and let the silence sit where my justifications used to be. The reactions were immediate. Some people accepted it with surprising ease. They adjusted. They found other ways forward. Those moments humbled me. They showed me how much of my indispensability had existed only in my own head. Others didn't adjust at all. They pushed. They reminded me of how I used to be. They framed my boundaries as distance, my honesty as withdrawal. A few took it personally, as if my decision to step back were a judgment of them. That hurt. It hurt because I wanted to be understood without having to explain. I wanted my change to be seen as growth, not abandonment. But growth rarely looks like growth from the outside. It often looks like loss. I had to accept that. The hardest part was the emptiness that followed. When you stop fixing everyone else's life, you're left with time. Silence. Space. And if you've avoided your own life long enough, that space can feel terrifying. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I would sit alone and feel restless, unsure, almost guilty, as if I were neglecting a duty. I had spent so many years being reactive that choosing proactively felt unnatural. But slowly, something shifted. I began to notice my own thoughts without immediately translating them into advice for someone else. I began to feel desires, small ones at first. Preferences. Opinions. Discomforts I had ignored because they were inconvenient. I started asking myself questions I had always deflected. What do I want my days to feel like? What am I curious about? What drains me and what gives something back? The answers were clumsy. Incomplete. Sometimes contradictory. But they were mine. And for the first time, that felt enough. I also faced something I hadn't expected: grief. Grief for the version of myself that had believed usefulness was the same as worth. Grief for the years I had spent standing on the sidelines of my own life, applauding other people's growth while postponing my own. I didn't try to romanticize that grief. I let it be what it was: a quiet acknowledgement of lost time. But grief, When faced honestly, doesn't he just take? It clarifies. I began to understand that helping others had never been the problem. The problem was helping others at the expense of myself, without consent, without balance, without choice. Now, when I help, it's different. I help because I choose to, not because I'm afraid of being unnecessary. I listen without absorbing. I care without disappearing. I allow myself to step back without guilt. Some relationships didn't survive that shift. That's the truth no one likes to say out loud. When you stop living as a solution, some people stop seeing you as essential. Losing those connections hurt, but keeping them would have meant returning to a version of myself I could no longer inhabit. What remained surprised me. A smaller circle. Quieter interactions. Less drama. More space. And within that space, a growing sense of presence I had never known before. I was no longer the calm in everyone else's storm. I was finally standing inside my own life. I don't see my past as a mistake anymore. It taught me empathy. It taught me patience. It taught me how to hold complexity. But it also taught me what happens when you confuse service with selfhood. The truth is simple, and it's heavy: you cannot live your life by fixing other people's. You cannot postpone yourself forever without eventually losing yourself. And being needed is not the same as being alive. I still help. I still care. I still show up. But now, I show up as a person, not a role. And when I sit at that same kitchen table at night, listening to the quiet, it feels different. The silence no longer accuses me. It holds me. Because this time, when I look at my life, I'm no longer waiting to manage it. I'm finally living it.